Inflation's, let's get it right this time, impact on debt. So we've already talked about in a previous section that inflation's impact on cash, it kind of destroys the value of cash. What about debt? What does it do to debt? Depends on the type of debt. If you have small debt, it doesn't impact it that much. If you had a debt of $500, £500 or €500, 5% inflation or 10% inflation is not going to have that much impact. It's really not. But it will have an impact. It will have some impact, especially if it's persistent inflation, especially if it lasts, 3, 4, 5, 6 years, then the cost of your debt will go down. And we'll talk about that in a moment when I talk about the larger debt. So I think that's where it gets very interesting. How does it impact large debt? Basically, it's very interesting. The price of the debt or the value of the debt goes down. And that might seem strange, but it can have a huge impact on larger debts such as mortgages and government debt. Now, this is a bit harder to understand, so I'm going to try and take some time to explain it in as concise and easy to understand way as I can. So I'll give you an example. The price of things are always going up. There's always a little bit of inflation in most markets. Well, that's certainly what we've seen, over the last 50 to 100 years in the UK, right? And in most markets around the world, barring places like Japan, which have seen something slightly different. But anyway, most things go up in price. When they do with inflation, especially when inflation is high, price of debt goes down because the value of your currency is going up. So you're earning, for example, if you bought a house in 1960 and in a nice suburb of London. I know this because I can give you my grandfather's example, actually. He bought a house in Blackheath, which is a very nice area of South London. I think where a lot of well-to-do people live, ambassadors and MPs and, famous people at the time were living in Blackheath. I don't know I'm not quite sure about now, but anyway, he bought that property. Not sure when he bought it, but a long time ago. And he bought it for £1,000. When he sold it for £40,000. And recently I looked at some houses on the street because my father told me the name of the street. I can't remember it for this broadcast. But those houses now sell for £2 million, right? So the thing about this is it's not just, when we're talking about house price, it's not just price appreciation because the quality of housing is going up. That's not right. Inflation is a massive part of why house prices go up. And I think they show a really interesting example, because if you had a interest-only mortgage on a house, let's say you bought it in 1960 and it cost you 10K, $10,000, pounds, euros, whatever. And then you had a 35-year mortgage in 1995. Let's say in London, a 10K house in London in 1960, and you sold it in 95, might have been worth 150K. And if you had an interest-only mortgage, then at the end of that mortgage term, they would say, okay, Jake, you need to pay your £10,000 mortgage off now. And you would easily say, oh, well, the value of the property is 150. So you could either sell the property, pay off the debt and buy another property, or, you'd have lots of options. And the reason is because inflation decreases the cost of debt, but earnings go up. Average earnings in 1960 were probably quite low, but by the 90s, you could earn 30,000 a year. I think my father was earning maybe 30,000 a year in the 90s. And, if you'd have bought that property for 10K in the 60s, you can see that whilst the debt stays kind of the same and kind of goes down because of inflation, like wages over time do go up. And over the course of one's career, you do better and you earn more money. The impact on larger debts, such as mortgages, can be very large. What about personal loans? It's the same with personal loans. Over a period of time, if you get a personal loan, let's say for 10,000, I'm not encouraging anyone here. This is just my opinion. I'm talking about it from a mathematical perspective, not from an advice perspective. So just using an example of a £10,000 loan now, if you get that 10K loan and there's inflation of 10% a year for, let's say 5% a year for the next 20 years, like the actual cost of that debt will be close to zero in 20 years time. Now, it's very rare. You're not going to get a personal loan for 20 years, but you might get a mortgage for 30 years. And there's an interesting intersection between when you can get debt, when it's cheapest to get debt, and when it's expensive to get debt. Now, at the moment, at the time of speaking, interest rates in the UK are 0.25%. I was very fortunate. I maybe saw things coming a little bit, and I fixed all my mortgages when the interest rate was 0.1%. I didn't get 0.1% because banks always charge more than the base rate. So I think I got between kind of 1.8 to 2.5%. But already the interest rates went up a few days ago. I've saved a lot of money on the interest payments. I think it's going to work out between 15,000, 30,000. I haven't done the raw calculations, but that's what it's looking like already. If interest rates go up further, then my savings will be larger. So it can have a big impact, and governments have a lot of debt. The bigger the amount, the more beneficial it is to have a higher inflation rate, because the cost of that debt goes down. So they want high-ish inflation. It's not really a word, but they want high inflation to a certain extent, but not too high as they don't want to raise interest rates too quickly. That's quite important. If the governments, it's not the governments actually, it's the central banks. So in the UK, it's the Bank of England. In Europe, it's the ECB, or the European Central Bank. And in the United States, it's the Fed, or the Federal Reserve. These are the institutions that have the power to increase interest rates, and they don't want to increase it too quickly. But the Fed has said last week, this is December 2021, that they're going to raise rates 8 times in the next 2 to 3 years. Typically, from a financial perspective, the UK does things quite similarly to the US. For example, the Federal Reserve raised the interest rates on Wednesday or Thursday last week from 0.1 to 0.25 in the United States. And then a few hours later, the exact same thing happened in the United Kingdom. Okay, guys, well, I hope you enjoyed that video on inflation's impact on debt. It might be hard to understand, but to summarize, inflation has a pretty small impact on smaller debts, but still does decrease the value of it. On larger debts, it can decrease the value of things like mortgages. And from a personal perspective, the other thing is, if you have buy-to-let mortgages, then rents are likely to increase when inflation is around. So you have this interesting double whammy that if you fix interest rates at a low rates, like what I've done, and you can increase rents, your debt goes down, your income goes up, and you fixed all of your risk, if you like. So that's really interesting. Similarly, if you fix your mortgage and your wages go up, then you're going to be in that position as well. So I can't advise what anyone should do, but I've certainly spent some time thinking about this and making sure that I fixed some of my variable costs, some of these interest rate costs, with loans and mortgages. And I'm going to celebrate with my partner and my business partner when I can. At the moment, there are some risks at the time of speaking in terms of going out, because we're in a second round of a global pandemic. But nevertheless, I think that you should celebrate when you make good decisions. Guys, knowledge is power, especially the right kind of knowledge, and progress is everything. I'll see you guys after the break.